Clint Eastwood sat at the piano, played the first note, and Johnny Carson's eyes filled with tears because that melody brought back a story no one had known for 15 years. It was March 1982. The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Studio 6B in Burbank. Another Thursday night. Clint Eastwood was the guest, Hollywood's biggest action star, the man with no name, the tough guy who rarely showed emotion on screen or off. The interview had been going well. Johnny and Clint had an easy rapport, trading stories about film sets, laughing about Hollywood absurdities, the kind of relaxed conversation that made great television. The audience was engaged, laughing at all the right moments. Johnny was shuffling his cue cards, preparing to wrap up the segment and go to commercial, when he noticed something. On the stage, positioned near the curtain, was a grand piano. It had been there all night, part of the set decoration, occasionally used by musical guests, but mostly just background. Johnny glanced at it, then back at Clint, and a mischievous look crossed his face. The kind of look that meant he was about to do something spontaneous. "Clint," Johnny said, leaning back in his chair with that trademark grin, "I have to ask you something. Can you play piano?" Clint looked surprised by the question. "I can. A little." "Why?" "Because," Johnny gestured toward the piano with a theatrical flourish, "we have a perfectly good instrument sitting right there doing nothing. And I'm curious. Can the toughest guy in movies actually play something soft?" The audience laughed. It was classic Carson, turning a simple question into a playful challenge. Ed McMahon chuckled beside the desk. Doc Severinsen and the band looked amused. Clint smiled, that rare genuine smile that he almost never showed in his films. "You really want me to play something?" "I really do," Johnny said. "Come on. Show America that Dirty Harry has a sensitive side." More laughter. Clint looked at the piano, then back at Johnny, clearly considering whether this was a good idea. Then he stood up. The audience applauded as Clint walked across the stage to the piano. He sat down on the bench, adjusted it slightly, and placed his hands on the keys. He looked back at Johnny with a slight smile. "Any requests?" Clint asked. "Surprise me," Johnny said, still grinning, expecting maybe a simple tune, a few chords, something light and amusing. Clint's fingers touched the keys. And everything changed. Carson stopped mid-joke. The entire studio froze. The melody that came from that piano was not simple. It was not light. It was achingly beautiful, slow, melancholic, hauntingly familiar in the way old songs are, like something half-remembered from childhood. Clint played with genuine skill, his fingers moving across the keys with practiced precision. His eyes closed. His entire body relaxed into the music. This wasn't a movie star doing a party trick. This was a real musician playing something that clearly meant something to him. Johnny's smile faded. His hands, which had been holding his cue cards, slowly lowered to the desk. His expression transformed from amused to transfixed to something deeper. Something the audience couldn't quite identify but could feel. Ed McMahon noticed it too. He leaned slightly toward Johnny, concerned. "Johnny," he said quietly. Johnny didn't respond. He was staring at Clint, at the piano, at the hands creating this unexpected beauty, and his eyes were filling with tears. The control room went quiet. Director Bobby Quinn leaned toward his monitors. "Is Johnny trying?" He whispered to Fred de Cordova. Fred nodded slowly. "Keep the cameras on him. Something's happening." The audience had stopped their polite applause. They sat in complete silence, sensing that this moment had shifted into something unplanned, something real. Some of them were watching Clint play. Most were watching Johnny's face, watching the tears form and begin to slide down his cheeks. To understand what was happening, you need to understand what happened in 1967. Johnny Carson wasn't always the unshakable king of late-night television. In 1967, 5 years into hosting The Tonight Show, he was successful but struggling personally. His second marriage was falling apart. His relationship with his sons was strained. The pressure of doing the show 5 nights a week, of always being on, of being America's comedian while dealing with private pain, was crushing him. He'd started seeing a therapist, quietly, secretly, because in 1967 successful men didn't talk about mental health, didn't admit to struggling, didn't show weakness. The therapist's name was Dr. Margaret Brennan. She was in her 60s, brilliant, kind, and she had an unusual method for helping patients access difficult emotions. She used music. "You joke to survive," she told Johnny during one session. "You've built this armor of humor, and it's necessary. It's how you do your job. But you need a where you can let that armor down, where you can feel what you're actually feeling." She had a piano in her office. An old upright. She asked Johnny to sit beside her while she played. "I'm going to play something," she said. "And I want you to just listen. Don't joke. Don't deflect. Just sit with whatever comes up." She played a melody. The same melody Clint Eastwood was playing right now on the Tonight Show stage 15 years later. Johnny sat in that therapist's office and for the first time in years cried. Really cried. Not the performative emotion he could summon for a sketch, but genuine grief for his failing marriage, for his distant children, for the loneliness of being Johnny Carson. "This is your song now," Dr. Brennan told him when he'd composed himself. "Whenever you need to remember that it's okay to feel, to be sad, to be human, remember this melody. It's permission to stop performing." Johnny saw Dr. Brennan for 3 years. She helped him through his divorce, through reconnecting with his sons, through understanding that he could be both Johnny Carson the performer and John William Carson the human being. She died in 1975. Heart attack. Sudden and unexpected. Johnny got the news while he was getting ready for the show. He did the monologue that night anyway, made America laugh for 90 minutes, and never mentioned that he'd lost someone who'd saved his life. He hadn't heard that melody since their last session in 1970. He never asked her what it was called. He never tried to find it. It was hers, a gift she'd given him, and he locked it away with all the other private things he never talked about publicly. Until tonight. March 1982. When Clint Eastwood sat at a piano and unknowingly played Dr. Brennan's song. Subscribe and leave a comment because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Clint was still playing. The melody continued, each note perfect, each phrase building on the last. He had no idea what was happening at Johnny's desk. He was lost in the music and whatever memories or emotions it brought up for him. Johnny wiped his eyes quickly, but the tears kept coming. The cameras stayed on him. Close-up shots showing America's most composed entertainer completely undone by something as simple as a piano melody. Ed McMahon reached over and gently touched Johnny's arm. "You okay, pal?" He whispered again. Johnny nodded, but didn't speak. Couldn't speak. When Clint played the final note, letting it sustain and fade into silence, the studio remained quiet. No one applauded. No one moved. They were all looking at Johnny. Clint opened his eyes and turned on the piano bench to face Johnny. He saw the tears immediately. His expression shifted from peaceful to concerned. "Johnny," Clint said, Did I do something wrong?" Backstage, he made a choice no producer would have ever allowed. Johnny stood up. He didn't say anything to Ed, didn't look at the cameras, didn't acknowledge the audience, or the control room frantically trying to figure out what to do. He just walked across the stage to the piano where Clint still sat. The cameras followed him. The audience held their breath. Johnny stood beside the piano, looking down at the keys at Clint's hands still resting on them. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "What was that song?" Johnny asked. It doesn't have a name," Clint said quietly. "It's something my piano teacher composed when I was a kid. She used to play it at the end of every lesson. She said it was for remembering, for when you needed to stop and feel something real." Johnny's breath caught. "Your piano teacher?" "Yeah. Mrs. Brennan. Margaret Brennan. She taught me from when I was 8 until I was 16. She died a few years back. When you asked me to play, I don't know why, but that's the melody that came to me. I haven't played it in years." The studio was absolutely silent. Even the control room had stopped talking. Fred de Cordova stood behind Bobby Quinn's chair, one hand over his mouth, understanding dawning on his face. Johnny looked at Clint. "Margaret Brennan taught you piano?" "In Oakland." "Yeah. She was incredible. Taught music to kids in the neighborhood who couldn't afford lessons. She changed my life. Clint paused. Did you know her? But this was the moment no one in the studio, nor anyone at home, ever saw coming. Johnny sat down on the piano bench beside Clint. Right there on live television, Johnny Carson sat at a piano with Clint Eastwood and started to cry in earnest. She was my therapist, Johnny said, his voice breaking. From 1967 to 1970. She played this song for me in her office when I was falling apart. She told me it was permission to be human. Permission to stop performing and just feel. Clint's eyes widened. Margaret was your therapist? She saved my life, Johnny said simply. And I never got to thank her properly. When she died, I couldn't talk about it. I couldn't explain to anyone what she meant to me because I'd never told anyone I was in therapy. And now you're sitting here playing her song and he stopped overcome. Clint put his hand on Johnny's shoulder. Two of Hollywood's most famously guarded men sitting together at a piano on live television, connected by a woman who had touched both their lives decades apart. She talked about you sometimes, Clint said quietly. She never said your name. But she'd tell me about a student she had who made people laugh. She said making people laugh was the hardest job in the world because you had to feel everything but only show joy. She was so proud of that student. Johnny covered his face with his hands. His shoulders shook. The cameras stayed on them. This impossible moment of vulnerability and connection. Ed McMahon stood up from his chair and walked over. He put his hand on Johnny's back, saying nothing, just being present. Doc Severinsen stepped down from the bandstand and joined them. The whole studio seemed to gather around that piano, not physically but emotionally. Everyone bearing witness to something sacred. After a long moment, Johnny lowered his hands. He looked at the piano keys, then at Clint. Will you teach it to me? Johnny asked. The whole thing. So I can play it myself? Right now? Clint asked. Right now. And there on The Tonight Show, in front of 300 studio audience members and millions watching at home, Clint Eastwood taught Johnny Carson how to play Margaret Brennan's song. It took 20 minutes. The show ran long. They missed commercial breaks. The control room gave up trying to get them back on schedule. Clint would play a phrase, then guide Johnny's fingers to the right keys. Johnny would stumble through it, make mistakes, try again. Like a child learning piano for the first time. The audience watched in reverent silence. Some were crying. Most were simply transfixed by the intimacy of it, watching two legends be utterly, completely human. When Johnny finally played the whole melody through, imperfectly, slowly, but completely, the studio erupted. Not the usual Tonight Show applause. Something deeper. Cathartic. The kind of applause that honors courage. Johnny and Clint stood up. They embraced. A long, genuine hug between two men who'd found unexpected connection through a melody and a woman who'd shaped both their lives. Thank you, Johnny whispered, for bringing her back to me. She'd be proud of you, Clint whispered back. She always was. The audience rose as one. Standing ovation. Not for entertainment, but for witnessing something real. Johnny turned to the camera, wiping his eyes. We'll be right back, he said, and for once, his voice wasn't steady. It was just human. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. After the show, Johnny had the piano moved to his office. He practiced Margaret Brennan's melody every day for the next 10 years until he retired. He never became great at it, but that wasn't the point. When Clint Eastwood directed his first film about music years later, he dedicated it to Mrs. B. Johnny sent him a handwritten note that said simply, "She's still teaching us." The melody was never forbidden again. It was permission to feel. Always.